My son was dying right in front of my eyes, and nobody seemed to know why. The doctors called it a rare autoimmune disorder, but my gut told me it was murder. Then, in the middle of a silent, suffocating dinner, my 12-year-old grandson Leo kicked me under the table. He dropped his fork. When I bent down to help him retrieve it, he shoved a crumpled piece of paper into my palm. His eyes were wide with a terror no child should ever know. I waited until I was safe in the bathroom to read it. The note said, "Grandpa, check the storage unit Dad rented. Unit 247. You need to see what is inside before Friday." So I went to check. When I rolled up that metal door and saw what my daughter-in-law had prepared for my son, I did not scream. I did not cry. I started planning my revenge. I am Garrison Ford. I spent 40 years as a forensic toxicologist for the state of Virginia. I have testified in over 300 murder trials. I know what cyanide smells like, and I know what arsenic does to the nervous system. But the hardest case of my life was sitting across the dining table from me, withering away in a wheelchair. Before I tell you how I brought the whole house of cards down, please hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. Let me know in the comments if you have ever had to protect a family member from the people who were supposed to love them. Your support helps me share these stories. Now let us go back to that dinner. The dining room smelled of expensive truffle oil and the copper tang of sickness. My son Brandon sat in his wheelchair at the head of the table. 6 months ago, he was a tech CEO who ran marathons and flew his own plane. Now he was a skeleton draped in cashmere. His skin had the gray, translucent quality of hypoxic stress. His head, once full of thick, dark hair, was now patchy and covered by a beanie cap. He was 40 years old, but he looked 80. I watched his hands. That is what a toxicologist does. We watch the extremities. Brandon was trying to lift a silver spoon to his mouth, but the tremors were violent. The spoon clicked against his teeth, spilling soup down his chin. Vanessa, his wife, sighed. It was not a sigh of sympathy. It was the sigh of someone whose luggage is taking too long to arrive at the airport. She reached over with a napkin and wiped his face a little too hard. The friction turned his pale skin red. "You are making a mess, Brandon," she said. Her voice was sweet, sickly sweet, like fruit that has been left out in the sun too long. "Just let me do it." "I can do it," Brandon rasped. His voice was a wet, rattling sound. It sounded like his lungs were filled with broken glass. Vanessa took the spoon from him anyway. She forced it into his mouth. "Eat. You need your strength for Friday. The lawyers are coming at 10 in the morning to finalize the power of attorney transfer. We want you to be lucid, don't we?" I gripped my steak knife until my knuckles turned white. Friday. That was the deadline. Vanessa had been pushing for full control over Brandon's company and his estate for weeks, claiming it was to relieve him of stress. I looked at Brandon's fingernails as he struggled to swallow. There were white horizontal lines running across the nail bed. In my line of work, we call those Mies lines. They are not a symptom of an autoimmune disease. They are a signature. They are the footprint of heavy metal poisoning. Thallium, arsenic, selenium. One of them was coursing through his veins. I spoke up, keeping my voice level. "The soup looks salty, Vanessa. His kidneys are failing. Should he be eating that much sodium?" Vanessa did not even look at me. She kept her eyes on her Apple Watch, scrolling through text messages, while she shoved another spoonful into my son's mouth. "Dr. Cross said he needs electrolytes, Garrison. Are you a doctor? No. You are a retired lab rat who hasn't opened a medical journal in a decade. Let the professionals handle this." "I am a toxicologist," I said. "I know what shuts a body down." Vanessa laughed. It was a cold, sharp sound. "And look where that got you. Living in a condo while we take care of the real problems. Just eat your dinner, Garrison. Be grateful we still invite you over." She checked her watch again. She was timing him. She was not feeding him. She was refueling a dying engine just enough to keep it running until the contract was signed. The doorbell rang. The air in the room shifted. Brandon flinched. Even in his weakened state, his body knew what was coming. Vanessa stood up, smoothing her silk dress. "That must be Adrian. He is here for the evening treatment." Dr. Adrian Cross walked into the dining room like he owned the deed to the house. He was young, handsome in a slimy way, and wore a suit that cost more than my first car. He carried a black medical bag. He did not look at the patient. He looked at the wife. The glance they shared lasted only a second, but I saw it. It was intimate. It was a look of shared secrets and shared anticipation. "How is our patient tonight?" Adrian asked, setting his bag on the mahogany sideboard. "Refusing to cooperate as usual," Vanessa said, playing the victim. Adrian pulled out a syringe and a vial of clear liquid. I stood up. "What is that?" I asked. Adrian paused, looking at me with amusement. "It is a myocardial stabilizer, Mr. Ford, to regulate his heart rate. His arrhythmia is getting worse." "What is the name of the drug?" I demanded. "I want to know the compound." Adrian sighed and looked at Vanessa. "Does he have to be here for this?" "He is family, Adrian," Vanessa said, though the word sounded like an insult. "Just ignore him. He thinks everything is a conspiracy." Adrian turned back to me, his smile condescending. "It is a proprietary blend, Garrison. Standard protocol for late-stage degenerative neuromuscular failure. You would not understand the new pharmacology. Now please sit down. You are stressing Brandon out." He walked over to my son. Brandon tried to pull his arm away, but he was too weak. Adrian grabbed his thin wrist with a grip that was too tight. He jammed the needle into the IV port in Brandon's arm. I watched Brandon's eyes. They rolled back slightly. His breathing hitched. That was not a stabilizer. That was a sedative mixed with something else. Something that burns. I sat back down because I had no choice. If I made a scene, Vanessa would ban me from the house. If I was banned, I could not collect the evidence I needed to send them both to prison. I had to play the part of the helpless old man. Adrian packed up his bag. "I will see you Friday morning for the final evaluation before the signing," he said to Vanessa. "I will walk you out," she said. They left the room together. I heard them whispering in the hallway. I heard a low laugh. The room was silent except for Brandon's labored breathing. My grandson Leo was sitting across from me. He had not touched his food. Leo was 12, but tonight he looked small, like a frightened animal trying to make itself invisible. Leo looked at his father, then at the empty doorway where his mother had gone. He looked at me. His hand was shaking as he picked up his fork. Then he deliberately let it slip from his fingers. It clattered loudly onto the hardwood floor. "Oops," Leo whispered. "I will get it," I said. I pushed my chair back and ducked under the table. Leo was already reaching down. In the shadows beneath the tablecloth, our hands met. He did not just hand me the fork. He pressed a small, tight ball of paper into my palm. His fingers were ice cold. I looked up at his face. He was not looking at me. He was staring at the doorway, terrified that his mother would return. "Take it," he mouthed silently. I closed my fist around the paper. I came back up, placed the fork on the table, and nodded at him. "I need to use the restroom," I said. I walked calmly out of the dining room. My heart was hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. I walked past the hallway where Vanessa and Adrian were standing by the front door. Adrian's hand was resting on Vanessa's waist, far too low to be professional. They didn't even notice me. They were too busy celebrating their victory. I locked the bathroom door and turned on the faucet to mask any sound. I unrolled the paper. It was torn from a school notebook. The handwriting was hurried, jagged. "Grandpa checked the storage unit Dad rented. Unit 247, on 4th Street. You need to see what is inside before Friday. The code is my birthday. I stared at the note. Brandon had been bedridden for months. He couldn't have rented a unit recently. This must have been from before the sickness took his legs. Why would a 12-year-old boy know about a storage unit, and why was he so afraid I flushed the toilet? But I did not flush the note. I tucked it into the hidden pocket of my jacket. I looked at myself in the mirror. An old man. A gray man. A man they thought was harmless. They were wrong. I left the bathroom and went back to the table. I finished my dinner. I watched Vanessa come back in smiling like a shark. I watched my son drift into a drug-induced stupor. I said my goodbyes at 8 o'clock. "Drive safe, Garrison." Vanessa called out from the porch. "Don't forget Friday is a big day." I got into my car. I did not drive home. I drove straight to the industrial district on 4th Street. The storage facility was a graveyard of metal doors under buzzing yellow lights. It was raining a cold drizzle that soaked through my coat. I found Unit 247. It was at the end of a long, dark row. I punched in Leo's birthday on the keypad. 0812. The light on the lock turned green. The mechanism clicked. I grabbed the handle and heaved the metal door upward. It rattled on its tracks, echoing in the silence. The smell hit me first. It was not the smell of dust or old furniture. It was the sharp, acrid scent of chemical reagents, formaldehyde, bleach, and underneath that something metallic. I fumbled for the light switch on the wall. The fluorescent tube flickered to life, humming loudly. I gasped. The air left my lungs. The unit was not full of boxes. It was set up like a clean room. There was a stainless steel table. There were monitors. There was a centrifuge. But that was not what made me freeze. In the center of the room, resting on 2 sawhorses, was a coffin. It was not a cheap pine box. It was polished mahogany lined with white silk. It was a masterpiece of craftsmanship. I walked toward it, my legs feeling like lead. I ran my hand along the smooth wood, and then I saw the brass plate screwed into the lid. Brandon Ford. 1984 to 2024. The current year. They hadn't just planned his death. They had already bought the box to bury him in. I gripped the edge of the coffin. Rage, hot and blinding, flooded my system. This was not just greed. This was a slaughter. I looked over at the desk in the corner. There was a laptop with a sticky note on it. "Watch me." I opened the laptop. It was password protected. But I knew Brandon. He used the same password for everything. His mother's name. The screen flared to life. There was a video file on the desktop labeled Evidence. I clicked play. Brandon's face filled the screen. He looked younger, healthier, but scared. He was whispering. "Dad, if you are watching this, it means I can't talk anymore. I think Vanessa is poisoning me. I found pills in her purse. I took samples. I am running tests here because I can't trust the house. I can't trust the food." The video cut to Brandon holding up a test tube. "It is thallium, Dad. She is dosing me with thallium. Small amounts. Just enough to mimic an autoimmune flare-up. She wants the company. She wants the insurance. And I think Dr. Cross is helping her." On the screen, Brandon started to cough. It was the same wet, rattling cough I heard tonight. "I am scared, Dad. I am going to hide this laptop here. I am going to try to leave you a sign. If I end up in a coma, don't let them cremate me. Test my hair. Test my nails. Please." The video ended. I stood in the silence of the storage unit, the hum of the freezer the only sound. I looked at the coffin again. They thought they had won. They thought Brandon was a helpless invalid and I was a senile old fool. They thought Friday would be their coronation day. I reached into my pocket and pulled out a pair of latex gloves I always carried. Old habits die hard. I was not going to the police. Not yet. The police in this town played golf with Adrian Cross. If I went to them now, this evidence would disappear, and Brandon would die of a heart attack before morning. No. I needed to be smarter. I needed to be the scientist. I looked around the makeshift lab Brandon had built. He had left me everything I needed. Reagents, test kits, and most importantly, as samples of his own blood that he had drawn before he became too weak. I took a deep breath. The smell of chemicals was comforting now. It was the smell of truth. I opened the test kit. I had 3 days until Friday. 3 days to synthesize a counteragent. 3 days to save my son. 3 days to turn their own trap against them. I am Garrison Ford, and I am about to teach these people that you never, ever try to poison the son of a toxicologist. The rain in Seattle does not wash things clean. It just pushes the grime deeper into the pavement. I stood on the porch of my son's $7 million prison listening to the house settle. Inside, the lights in the master bedroom had finally gone dark. Vanessa was likely asleep, or perhaps she was on a secure line with Dr. Cross, laughing about how easy it was to kill a man who was already half dead. I checked my watch. It was just past 11 at night. The digital numbers glowed pale green, a reminder that time was a luxury I could no longer afford. I could not take my own car. Vanessa was the type of woman who tracked mileage, and my sedan was linked to the family cloud account. If she saw I had driven to the industrial district at midnight, she would know the game was up. I had to be invisible. I walked 2 blocks down the hill, the cold rain seeping into the collar of my jacket, until I reached the service road, where the landscaping crew left their old pickup truck overnight. I had a spare key from years ago, when I used to help Brandon with the garden, back when he could still stand on his own 2 feet. The engine coughed and sputtered before roaring to life, a rough mechanical sound that felt comforting compared to the silent, deadly precision of the Tesla in Brandon's driveway. The drive to 4th Street took 20 minutes, but it felt like a lifetime. I kept checking the rearview mirror, half expecting to see the sleek headlights of Adrian's sports car tailing me. My heart was hammering against my ribs, an erratic rhythm that annoyed me. I was a professional. I had spent 40 years in cold, sterile labs analyzing the contents of stomachs and livers. I had stared at death through a microscope 1,000 times. But this was different. This was not a sample in a petri dish. This was my boy. Every time the windshield wipers slapped against the glass, I heard Brandon's wheezing breath. The storage facility was a desolate grid of concrete and corrugated steel surrounded by a chain-link fence topped with razor wire. It was the kind of place where people stored things they wanted to forget. Old furniture, failed business inventory, and broken dreams. Tonight it looked like a graveyard. The security lights buzzed with a dying yellow hum, casting long skeletal shadows across the wet asphalt. I pulled the truck into the shadow of a dumpster and killed the engine. Silence rushed back in heavy and oppressive. I sat there for a moment, gripping the steering wheel. I needed to calm my hands. A toxicologist requires steady hands. 1 drop too many or 1 drop too few, and the truth remains hidden. I took a deep breath, inhaling the smell of old tobacco and wet dog from the truck's upholstery, and forced my pulse to slow down. Then I stepped out into the rain. The facility was a maze. I navigated the rows of identical orange doors, the numbers counting up slowly. 200, 210, 220. My footsteps echoed too loudly on the concrete, sounding like gunshots in the quiet night. I felt exposed. The sensation of being watched crawled up my spine, prickling the hair on the back of my neck. I stopped and spun around my hand, instinctively going to the heavy flashlight in my pocket. There was nothing there. Just the rain dancing on the metal roofs and a stray cat darting under a shutter. But the feeling remained. It was the instinct of an old prey animal sensing a predator in the tall grass. I knew that if Vanessa and Adrian were willing to slowly poison a man, over 6 months, they were capable of anything. I was walking into the belly of their secret, and if they found me here, I would not leave. I found it. Unit 247. It was located at the very end of a dead-end row hidden from the main gate's sightline. It was a perfect hiding spot. The metal door was streaked with rust and grime, looking like it hadn't been opened in years. But when I looked closer at the electronic keypad, I saw that the buttons were clean. No dust. Someone had been here recently. I stared at the keypad. The red light blinked at me, a tiny, unblinking eye. I remembered the crumpled note in my pocket. Leo's birthday, August 12th. My grandson was the key. It broke my heart to think that a 12-year-old boy was carrying the weight of this password, the weight of whatever horror lay behind this door. I punched in the numbers. 0, 8, 1, 2. The machine beeped, a cheerful chirping sound that felt obscene in this grim place. The lock clicked, and the heavy latch sprang open. I grabbed the handle at the bottom of the door. It was cold and slick with rain. I heaved upward. The door resisted at first, heavy with neglect, before rolling up with a screeching metal on metal grind that set my teeth on edge. I expected the smell of mold. I expected the smell of dust or damp cardboard, or perhaps the stale air of an enclosed space. I did not expect the smell that hit me. It washed over me in a suffocating wave, freezing me in place before I even turned on the light. It was a smell I knew better than the scent of my late wife's perfume. It was the sharp, stinging odor of formaldehyde mixed with the sweet, cloying scent of isopropyl alcohol and the metallic tang of chemical reagents. It was the smell of a laboratory. It was the smell of a morgue. Why would a storage unit smell like a forensic lab? My hand trembled as I reached for the light switch on the wall. The darkness seemed to thicken around me, pulsing with a terrible energy. I flicked the switch. The overhead fluorescent tube flickered once, twice, buzzing angrily, before flooding the small space with a harsh, clinical white light. I blinked my eyes, adjusting to the glare. And then I saw it. The air left my lungs in a single, silent rush. I did not scream because my brain could not process the nightmare in front of me fast enough to signal my vocal cords. I just stood there, the rain soaking my back, staring into the abyss that my daughter-in-law had created. The fluorescent light overhead buzzed with the irritating rhythmic sound of a dying fly. It was the only sound in the world. Outside, the rain was still hammering against the metal roof of the storage facility, but inside Unit 247, the silence was so heavy, it felt like physical pressure against my eardrums. My eyes were locked on the object in the center of the room. It sat there on 2 heavy-duty industrial sawhorses, absurd and terrifying in its elegance. It was a coffin. But it was not just any coffin. I have seen thousands of caskets in my line of work. I have seen the cheap pine boxes provided by the state for the indigent. I have seen the standard steel models used for most burials. This was neither. This was a masterwork of death. It was solid oak, the wood grain deep and rich, polished to a mirror shine that reflected the harsh overhead light. The handles were solid brass, not plated plastic, gleaming with a golden hue. The lining visible through the split lid, which was propped slightly open, was crushed white velvet, pristine and inviting. It was the kind of coffin you buy for a head of state, or a beloved patriarch. It was the kind of coffin that costs more than most people's cars. I walked toward it. My legs felt disconnected from my body, as if I were wading through deep water. I reached out and touched the wood. It was cold. So cold. I ran my fingers along the rim. There was no dust. Someone had been here recently to polish it. Someone had been here to make sure it was ready. Then I saw the plate. It was a heavy brass rectangle screwed into the center of the lower lid. The engraving was deep, filled with black enamel to make the letters stand out. I leaned in closer, my breath fogging in the chill air, and I read the name that was etched there forever. Brandon Michael Ford. Seeing my son's name on a coffin while he was still breathing miles away in his own bed felt like a physical blow to the stomach. I doubled over, gripping the edge of the oak box to keep from falling to the concrete floor. Bile rose in my throat. I squeezed my eyes shut, trying to banish the image, but when I opened them, the brass plate was still there. And then I read the dates. 1984, the year I held him in the delivery room, terrified and awed by how small he was. Dash, the current year. I stared at that second number. 2024. We were only in October. There were still 2 months left in the year. But to the person who ordered this engraving, the year was already over. Brandon's timeline had been cut. His expiration date had been decided, stamped, and paid for. This was not a contingency plan. Families do not buy custom oak caskets with end dates engraved on them for a man fighting a mysterious illness. They buy them for a funeral that has already been scheduled. I stood up straight, the nausea slowly being replaced by a sensation I knew well. It was the feeling of cold, hard clarity. It was the feeling I used to get at a crime scene when the chaos of blood and evidence suddenly aligned into a pattern. This was not a disease. This was a slaughter. I looked at the coffin again, really looked at it. I analyzed it not as a father, but as a forensic expert. The craftsmanship suggested it had been ordered months ago. Custom work like this takes time. That meant Vanessa had ordered this box back when Brandon was first complaining of fatigue, back when she was telling everyone it was just stress from the merger. She had been planning his funeral while she was still pretending to research his symptoms. The sheer arrogance of it took my breath away. To order the coffin. To engrave the date. To hide it here in a rental unit paid for with Brandon's own money. It was a level of narcissism that borders on psychopathy. She wanted the perfect grieving widow moment. She wanted the funeral to be a spectacle of wealth and taste. She didn't want to wait for shipping or engraving after he died. She wanted to be able to snap her fingers the moment his heart stopped and have the stage set. I ran my hand over the brass plate again. 2024. Friday. The note said Friday. The lawyers were coming Friday. Once Brandon signed those papers transferring the company and the estate to her, he would be useless. He would become a liability, and liabilities are liquidated. I realized then that my son was not a person to her. He was livestock. He was a prize pig being fattened up, or in this case, whittled down for the slaughter. She was just waiting for the transfer of ownership before she utilized the final product. My grip on the coffin tightened until the wood creaked. I felt tears pricking my eyes, hot and angry. I remembered teaching Brandon to ride a bike. I remembered him graduating from Stanford. I remembered the day he met Vanessa, how happy he looked, how he told me she was the one. I had failed him. I had let a viper into his bed. I had let her isolate him, weaken him, and now she was preparing to bury him in a box she bought with his own fortune. But then the tears stopped. The grief receded, pulling back like the tide before a tsunami. In its place, something harder formed, something made of ice and iron. I looked at the date again. 2024. No, I whispered to the empty room. Not if I have anything to say about it. I took a step back from the coffin. It no longer looked like a tragedy to me. Now it looked like evidence. It was Exhibit A in a murder trial that hadn't started yet. I pulled out my phone. My hands were perfectly steady now. The tremors of shock were gone. I took a photo of the coffin. I took a close-up of the brass plate with the date. I took a photo of the serial number stamped on the back of the casket. I was going to find out who made this. I was going to find the receipt. I was going to find the paper trail that led straight back to Vanessa's credit card. But first I had to understand how they were doing it. The coffin was the what. I needed the how. I turned away from the oak box. The coffin dominated the center of the room, but it wasn't the only thing there. Against the far wall, buried in the shadows, was a workbench. It was cluttered with equipment that didn't belong in a storage unit. I walked over to it. The smell of chemicals got stronger. This was not Vanessa's doing. This was too messy, too desperate. This part of the room belonged to Brandon. I saw a centrifuge, old and second-hand. I saw a rack of test tubes, some empty, some containing dried, dark residue. And in the center of the mess, hidden under a stack of medical journals, was a laptop. I touched the laptop lid. It was cold, but it wasn't dusty. Vanessa had prepared the grave. But Brandon had been trying to solve his own murder. I opened the laptop. The screen reflected in my eyes a pale blue square in the darkness. I was done mourning. It was time to go to work. I was not just a father anymore. I was the lead investigator on the most important case of my life, and the victim was still alive. For now. The blue light from the laptop screen was the only thing illuminating the darkness of the storage unit. It cast long, ghostly shadows against the metal walls, making the coffin behind me look like a sleeping beast. I pulled the rusted metal stool closer to the workbench and sat down. My joints popped, a reminder of my age, a reminder that I should be retired fishing on a lake somewhere, not hunting down the monsters who were eating my family alive. I clicked the video file again. I needed to see it. I needed to hear him. Brandon's face filled the screen. The timestamp was from 3 weeks ago. He looked better than he did tonight at dinner, but the signs were already there. The dark circles under his eyes. The slight tremor in his jaw. He was sitting in his home office, whispering into the camera, constantly glancing at the door behind him. "Dad," he whispered. The sound of his voice, scared and small, tore through me like a serrated blade. "I do not know if you will ever see this. Maybe I am crazy. Vanessa says I am crazy. She says the memory loss is part of the condition. But I found something today." On the screen, Brandon held up a small plastic bag. Inside was a white powder. I found this in the bottom of her purse when she was in the shower. She told me it was an artificial sweetener she imports from Italy. But I tasted it, Dad. Just a tiny grain. It did not taste sweet. It tasted metallic. It tasted like sucking on a penny. I leaned closer to the screen. A metallic taste. It was the classic sign. "I brought a sample here," Brandon continued. "I bought a home testing kit online. The cheap kind. I don't know if it works, but I am scared. My hair is falling out in clumps. My feet feel like they are burning. It feels like I am walking on hot coals every time I take a step. Peripheral neuropathy. Alopecia." The symptoms were screaming at me now. The video cut out abruptly as a door slammed in the background of the recording. Brandon's eyes went wide with panic, and he slammed the laptop shut. The screen went black. I sat there in the silence, my heart pounding, a slow, heavy rhythm against my ribs. My son had been fighting for his life alone. He had been stumbling through the fog of poison, trying to find the truth, while his wife gaslit him into believing he was losing his mind. He had rented this unit not just to hide evidence, but to create a sanctuary where he could think clearly away from the tainted food and the spiked drinks. I turned away from the computer. I could not dwell on the sorrow. Sorrow was a luxury. Sorrow was for the funeral. Right now, I needed certainty. I looked at the chaotic mess of the workbench. Brandon had tried to be a scientist, but he was a software engineer. He had the logic, but not the technique. He had bought a dozen different testing kits for lead, for mercury, for arsenic. Most of them were unopened. He had run out of time before he could figure out which one to use. But I knew. I reached for my bag and pulled out the portable toxicology kit I had brought with me. It was old, from my days consulting for the private sector, but the reagents were stable. I pulled on a pair of fresh latex gloves. The snap of the rubber against my wrist sounded like a gunshot in the quiet room. I scanned the table. I needed a biological sample. Brandon had said he took samples. I moved a stack of papers and found a row of small glass vials labeled with dates. He had been drawing his own blood. The most recent one was from 2 days ago. The blood had separated the dark red cells settling at the bottom, the plasma floating on top. I picked up the vial. It was cold. He must have kept it in a mini fridge before the power was cut, or maybe the chill of the unit preserved it. It didn't matter. Heavy metals do not degrade. They stay in the blood. They stay in the bone. They wait to be found. I set up a small Bunsen burner Brandon had bought. I lit it, the blue flame hissing softly. I took a clean test tube and used a pipette to draw a small amount of the plasma from Brandon's sample. My hands were steady. This was the ritual. This was the work. The world outside, the rain, the coffin, the lying daughter-in-law faded away. There was only the chemistry. I added 3 drops of nitric acid to the plasma. It sizzled slightly, breaking down the organic matter. I swirled the tube, watching the liquid turn cloudy. Then came the moment of truth. I reached for the bottle of potassium iodide. If there was thallium in his system, the iodide would react with it. It would create a precipitate, a solid, that would fall out of the liquid. And the color of that precipitate would tell me everything. I held the test tube up to the light. I squeezed the dropper. 1 drop. The liquid swirled. 2 drops. A yellow cloud began to form in the clear solution. 3 drops. The reaction was immediate and violent. A bright canary yellow solid formed instantly and began to drift to the bottom of the tube like toxic snow. Thallus iodide. I stared at the yellow powder. It was beautiful in a sick chemical way. It was undeniable. It was not a trace amount. It was a massive concentration. My knees gave out. I slumped onto the stool, the test tube still clutched in my hand. Thallium. The poisoner's poison. Historically used to kill rats. Tasteless. Odorless. It dissolves perfectly in water, in soup, in medicine. It attacks the nervous system, first causing the burning feet Brandon described. Then it takes the hair. Then it destroys the heart muscle. It is a slow, agonizing way to die. It is torture masquerading as medicine. And they had been feeding it to him for months. A scream built up in my chest. It started in my gut, a ball of hot, molten rage that wanted to tear its way out of my throat. I wanted to throw the test tube against the wall. I wanted to overturn the table. I wanted to drive back to that mansion, kick down the door, and wrap my hands around Adrian Cross's throat until the light went out in his eyes. I wanted to make them feel the pain they were inflicting on my boy. I opened my mouth to let it out, to howl like a wounded animal into the empty night. But I stopped. I bit down on my lip until I tasted copper. I forced the air back into my lungs. If I screamed, I was just a grieving father. If I smashed things, I was just a crazy old man. If I went to the house now, I would be arrested for assault, and Vanessa would flush the remaining poison down the toilet. Brandon would die, and she would inherit everything, and she would laugh at my funeral too. I looked at the yellow powder in the tube. This was not just poison. This was leverage. I took a deep breath, counting to 10. 1, 2, 3. I forced my heart rate down. I visualized the rage as a cold, hard stone in my stomach. I would use it. I would not let it control me. I capped the test tube carefully. I labeled it. I placed it in a protective case. Then I looked around the room. I had to secure this place. This unit was the crime scene. It was the witness. I packed up Brandon's laptop. I packed up the samples. I took the hard drive that was connected to the security camera he had set up in the corner of the unit. I walked back to the coffin one last time. I placed my hand on the cold wood. "I am coming for them, son," I whispered. and I am bringing hell with me. I turned off the light. The darkness rushed back in, swallowing the lab, the coffin, and the secret. I rolled the metal door down, the screeching sound echoing in the night. I locked it. I walked back to my truck in the rain. I was no longer shaking. I was no longer afraid. The uncertainty was gone. I knew the weapon. Thallium. I knew the motive. Greed. I knew the timeline. Friday. I checked my watch. It was 1:00 a.m. on Wednesday. I had 48 hours to engineer a miracle. Thallium has an antidote, but it is not something you can buy at a pharmacy. It is an industrial pigment called Prussian blue. It binds to the metal in the gut and drags it out of the body. But getting it into Brandon was only half the battle. If I cured him, they would just switch to a pillow over his face. No, I had to do more than cure him. I had to trap them. I started the truck. The engine roared to life. As I pulled out of the storage facility, I did not turn left toward the police station. I turned right toward the highway. I needed allies, and I knew exactly who to call. The law could not help me now. I needed someone who knew how to operate in the shadows. I needed Saul. Solomon Roth was a disbarred lawyer who operated out of a diner on the south side. He was slimy, unethical, and brilliant. He was exactly the kind of shark you hire when you want to eat other sharks. I dialed his number. He picked up on the second ring, his voice raspy with smoke and insomnia. "Who is this?" "It is Garrison," I said. "Garrison Ford. I thought you were dead or retired." "I am neither," I said. "I need a favor, Sol, and I am willing to pay triple. I am listening. I am going to stage a murder," I said, "and I need you to make sure the audience is there." There was a pause on the line. Then I heard the click of a lighter. "I love a good show," Sol said. "Tell me what you need." I drove into the night, the yellow streetlights blurring into streaks of fire. The game had changed. They were playing for money. I was playing for blood. The windshield wipers slapped back and forth, slicing through the relentless Seattle drizzle as I drove toward the King County Sheriff's Station. The yellow vial of thallium precipitate was tucked safely in my inside jacket pocket, resting against my chest like a second heart. I had the evidence. I had the motive. I had the science. In my mind, the timeline was simple. I would walk and show Sheriff Patterson the test results, and within the hour, patrol cars would be swarming my son's driveway. Vanessa would be in handcuffs before sunrise. It was a comforting fantasy. It was the way the law was supposed to work. I pulled into the station lot. It was nearly 2 a.m. The building was a block of gray concrete, ugly and functional, with a few cruisers parked out front. I killed the engine and sat for a moment rehearsing my statement. I needed to be precise. I could not sound like a frantic father. I had to sound like an expert witness. I checked my reflection in the rearview mirror, smoothed my wet hair, and stepped out into the night. The lobby was empty except for a desk sergeant who looked like he was fighting a losing battle with sleep. He buzzed me in without asking for ID, recognizing me from the years I spent consulting for the state. I asked for Sheriff Patterson. I knew Jim Patterson. We had worked a few DUI cases together back in the day. He was a good old boy, the kind of lawman who shook your hand firmly and looked you in the eye. I trusted him. I waited on a hard plastic bench while the sergeant called back. 5 minutes passed, then 10. The silence of the station was unnerving. I could hear the hum of the vending machine and the distant crackle of a radio dispatcher. My hand kept drifting to my pocket, checking that the vial was still there. Finally, the heavy security door buzzed open. Sheriff Patterson stepped out. He looked tired, his uniform shirt unbuttoned at the collar, a mug of coffee in his hand. But his smile was wide and welcoming. "Garrison," he said, extending a hand. "Ideally, I would ask what brings you here at this hour, but I have a feeling it is not a social call. Come on back." I followed him through the bullpen past the empty desks and the bulletin boards covered in wanted posters and overtime schedules. We walked into his office, a glass-walled room that smelled of stale coffee and floor wax. He gestured for me to sit in one of the leather chairs opposite his desk. I sat down, leaning forward, ready to lay it all out. "Jim," I said, "I need to report a crime. It is an attempted murder, and the victim is my son." Patterson's expression shifted instantly from tired to alert. He set his mug down. "Brandon, what happened? Was there an intruder?" "No," I said. "It is an inside job. I have evidence that he is being poisoned." I reached into my pocket. My fingers closed around the protective case holding the test tube. "Poisoned," Patterson repeated. He leaned back in his chair, a strange look crossing his face. It wasn't shock. It was something else. A flicker of recognition. "That is a serious accusation, Garrison." "Who do you suspect, Vanessa?" I said. "And the family doctor, Adrian Cross." I watched his face closely. I was trained to read micro-expressions. I expected surprise. I expected him to grab a notepad. Instead, Patterson let out a long breath. He didn't reach for a pen. He reached for a framed photograph on the corner of his desk and turned it slightly, as if checking the angle. "Adrian Cross," he said slowly. "That is a heavy name to throw around, Garrison. You know Adrian is a pillar of this community. He just donated a new wing to the pediatric center." I froze. My hand was still in my pocket, gripping the vial. "He is poisoning my son with thallium," I said, my voice dropping to a whisper. "I ran the tests myself tonight." Patterson looked at me. His eyes were not unkind, but they were patronizing. They were the eyes of a man looking at a confused senior citizen. "Garrison, look. I know you are under a lot of stress. Adrian actually mentioned this to me." The air left the room. My blood ran cold. "He mentioned what I asked." Patterson sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. "We had dinner at the club just last night. He and Vanessa are very worried about you. Adrian said you have been having trouble accepting Brandon's diagnosis. He said you have been paranoid, seeing conspiracies where there is only tragedy. He even mentioned you might try to interfere with the treatment." I stared at the sheriff. I looked past him to the photo on his desk. It was a picture of a foursome on a golf course. Patterson was in the middle, laughing, his arm draped around a younger man in a white polo shirt. The man was Dr. Adrian Cross. I looked at the wall behind the desk. There was a calendar from Cross Medical Group. There was a signed baseball in a case. I realized then, with a sickening jolt, that I had walked right into a trap. Adrian Cross had inoculated the sheriff against me. He had planted the seed days ago. If I pulled this vial out now, Patterson wouldn't see evidence. He would see a prop. He would see exactly what Adrian told him. He would see a senile old man trying to frame the good doctor. And worse, if I handed this vial over, it would be logged into evidence. And 10 minutes later, Patterson would call his golf buddy Adrian to give him a heads up. The evidence would go missing from the locker before the sun came up. And by the time I got back to the house, Vanessa would have flushed every pill and scrubbed every surface. Garrison, Patterson asked, his voice softening. "Do you want me to call someone?" "Maybe I should call Adrian. He can come pick you up." The threat was veiled, but it was there. He was offering to hand me over to the executioner. I released my grip on the vial in my pocket. I forced my hand to come out empty. I rubbed my face, feigning exhaustion. "I am sorry, Jim," I said. My voice trembled, and for once I didn't have to act. I was terrified. "Maybe you are right. I have not slept in 3 days, watching him fade away. It is doing things to my head." Patterson nodded, looking relieved. He didn't want to arrest his friend. He wanted the easy answer. "Grief does strange things to us, Garrison. Go home. Get some sleep. Let the doctors do their job." I stood up. My legs felt shaky. I had to get out of there before he asked more questions. I had to get out before he decided to call Adrian anyway, just to be helpful. "Thank you, Jim," I said. "I will go home." I walked out of the office. I walked back through the bullpen. I felt Patterson's eyes on my back. I forced myself to walk slowly like a defeated old man. But as soon as the heavy glass doors of the station closed behind me and the cold night air hit my face, I started to run. I ran to my truck. I fumbled with the keys. I locked the doors and peeled out of the lot, my heart hammering against my ribs. I had been naive. I thought the truth was enough. But the truth is only as strong as the system that protects it. And this system was owned by the people killing my son. I could not go to the police. I could not go to the hospital. I was completely alone. I drove aimlessly for 10 minutes, checking my mirrors to make sure no squad car was following me. I needed a new plan. I couldn't use the law. I had to go outside the law. I needed someone who didn't play golf with doctors. I needed someone who didn't care about donations or reputations. I needed a weapon that Vanessa and Adrian wouldn't see coming. I pulled into the parking lot of a 24-hour diner on the edge of town. The neon sign buzzed and flickered. Inside, sitting in a booth at the back, was the only man in Seattle who hated the system more than I did right now. Solomon Roth. I touched the vial in my pocket one last time. The police wouldn't take it. But Soul Saul would know exactly how to use it to blow their lives apart. I drove back to the house like a man possessed. The rain had stopped, leaving the streets slick and black, reflecting the streetlights like spilled oil. My hands were gripping the steering wheel so hard, my knuckles ached, but I couldn't feel the pain. All I could feel was the weight of the yellow precipitate in my pocket and the burning need to get my son out of that house. The police had failed me. The system had failed me. Now it was just me against them. I didn't bother with the doorbell. I used my key, turning the lock with a savage twist and pushing the heavy front door open. The house was quiet, buried in that deep, unnatural silence that only exists in places where secrets are kept. The grandfather clock in the hallway ticked rhythmically, a slow countdown that felt like a mockery of the time I didn't have. I took the stairs 2 at a time, my bad knee protesting with every step, but I ignored it. I headed straight for the master bedroom. The door was ajar. Inside the room smelled of lavender air freshener, trying to cover up the scent of decay. Brandon was awake. He was propped up against a mountain of pillows, his eyes sunken and dull, staring at the ceiling fan spinning slowly overhead. He looked like a ghost, haunting his own life. When he saw me, his eyes widened slightly, a flicker of recognition, maybe even hope, sparking in the gray depths. "Dad," he wheezed. The sound was barely a whisper, a dry rustle of leaves. I went straight to the bed. I didn't waste time with pleasantries. I grabbed the wheelchair parked in the corner and slammed it next to the mattress. "We are leaving, Brandon," I said, my voice low and urgent. "I am taking you to the University Hospital in Seattle. Right now." I reached under his arms, trying to lift him. He was terrifyingly light. He felt like a bird made of hollow bones. He groaned, a sound of pain that tore at my heart. But I couldn't stop. I had to get him into the chair. "What is happening?" he asked, his head lolling back against my chest. "I have proof, son," I whispered into his ear as I adjusted his legs. "I know what they are doing. I know about the thallium." Suddenly, the overhead lights blazed on blindingly bright. I froze. Vanessa was standing in the doorway. She was wearing a silk robe, her arms crossed over her chest. She wasn't holding a weapon. She was holding a piece of paper. And behind her, leaning casually against the doorframe, was Dr. Adrian Cross. "Put him back in bed, Garrison," Vanessa said. Her voice was calm, terrifyingly calm. I didn't let go of Brandon. I shielded him with my body, turning to face them. "I am taking him out of here, Vanessa, and if you try to stop me, I will break your neck." Vanessa didn't flinch. She just held up the paper. "You won't do anything," she said. "Because if you move him 1 inch from that bed, I will call 911 and have you arrested for kidnapping and elder abuse. I laughed, a harsh barking sound. Kidnapping, he is my son, and you are killing him. Read it, Adrian said. His voice was smooth, professional, the voice of a man who controls the room. Vanessa took a step forward and tossed the paper onto the foot of the bed. It landed near Brandon's feet. It is a medical guardianship order signed by Judge Henderson yesterday, she said. It states that due to Brandon's cognitive decline and inability to make decisions, I have full legal authority over his medical care, his residence, and his visitors. You have no rights here, Garrison. None. I looked at the paper. I recognized the seal. I recognized the language. It was ironclad. If I took him now, I would be a felon. They would catch me before I reached the highway, and I would never see Brandon again. I am a toxicologist, I spat out. I have evidence. I found the lab in the storage unit. I have a sample of his blood. Adrian stepped into the room. He shook his head sadly, looking at Brandon, not me. Paranoia is a terrible thing to witness in a parent. Isn't it, Vanessa? He said. He looked at me with pity. Garrison, that storage unit is full of hazardous materials Brandon bought online when his mind started to go. We know about it. We were protecting him from himself. As for the blood, well, contamination is easy to fabricate. He opened his black medical bag. The sound of the zipper was loud in the room. I stood my ground. You are not touching him. Adrian ignored me. He pulled out a syringe. He held it up to the light, tapping the side to clear the air bubbles. The liquid inside was clear. Innocent looking. He needs his night dose, Garrison, Adrian said. His heart rate is elevated because you barged in here and terrified him. If he goes into cardiac arrest now, it will be your fault. No, I shouted. I lunged forward, grabbing Adrian's wrist. The moment my hand touched him, Vanessa screamed. It was a theatrical, practiced scream. Assault, she yelled. Get away from him, Adrian didn't fight back. He didn't have to. He just looked at me and said quietly, Go ahead, Garrison. Hit me. Break my wrist. Then explain to the police why you attacked the doctor trying to save your son. You will be in a cell tonight, and I will be here alone with Brandon for as long as I want. My hand froze. I looked at Brandon. He was watching us, tears streaming down his face. He was terrified. Not of the medicine, but of what would happen if I left. If I got arrested, he died. It was that simple. Slowly, agonizingly, I released Adrian's wrist. I stepped back. I felt like I was surrendering my soul. Good choice, Adrian said. He smoothed his shirt cuff. He moved to the bedside. Vanessa moved to the other side, taking Brandon's hand in a mockery of comfort. Shh, baby, it is okay, she cooed. Daddy is just confused. We are going to make you feel better. I watched helpless as Adrian swabbed Brandon's arm with alcohol. I watched the needle pierce the thin, papery skin. I watched my son flinch. I watched the plunger go down, pushing the clear liquid, the poison, into his veins. I wanted to vomit. Every instinct in my body screamed at me to tear the IV out, to burn the house down. But I stood still. I stood still and forced myself to memorize every detail. The batch number on the vial, the injection site, the way Adrian's eyes dilated with a sick pleasure as he administered the dose. There, Adrian said, withdrawing the needle. That should help him sleep. He turned to me. You should go now, Garrison. Visiting hours are over. I looked at Brandon. His eyes were already drooping. The sedative was fast-acting. I will be back, I whispered. Vanessa smiled. It was the smile of a predator who has cornered its prey. Make sure you call first, she said. We wouldn't want to have to file a restraining order. I turned and walked out of the room. My legs felt heavy, like I was walking through wet concrete. I walked down the stairs past the ticking clock and out into the night. I sat in my truck for a long time, shaking. Not from fear, from rage. They thought they had won. They thought the piece of paper from the judge was a shield. They thought I was beaten. But they had made one mistake. They had let me walk out of there. I wiped the tears from my face. I started the engine. I wasn't going to the hospital. I wasn't going to the police. I was going to war, and I needed to build an army. I pulled out my phone and dialed Solomon Roth again. "Sol," I said when he answered, "I need you to find a judge who hates Judge Henderson, and I need you to get me a wiretap." "We are going to catch them," Sol asked. "No," I said, staring at the dark windows of my son's room. "We are not just going to catch them. We are going to destroy them." On live television. The neon sign of the Starlight Diner buzzed with an erratic insect-like hum, casting a sickly pink glow over the wet asphalt of the parking lot. I pulled my truck into the darkest corner far away from the entrance, right next to a beat-up Lincoln Town Car that looked like a relic from a different era. I cut the engine and sat in the darkness for a moment, listening to the rain drumming on the roof. This was not where respectable men conducted business, but I wasn't a respectable man anymore. I was a desperate one. I stepped out into the drizzle and opened the passenger door of the Lincoln. The interior smelled of stale tobacco, old leather, and fast food. Solomon Roth sat behind the wheel, illuminated only by the glow of a tablet resting on his lap. He was a disbarred lawyer who knew more about the law than any judge in the city, mostly because he had spent 30 years finding loopholes in it. He didn't look up when I slid into the seat. "You look like hell," Garrison Saul said, his voice a gravelly rasp. "I feel like hell," I replied. I told him everything. I told him about the sheriff. I told him about the guardianship papers. I told him about the needle going into Brandon's arm right in front of my eyes. Saul listened without interrupting. He took a drag from a cigarette, filling the car with gray smoke. When I finished, he let out a long, dry laugh. "So let me get this straight," he said. "You went to the police with a test tube in your pocket and expected justice. You are smarter than that. Patterson is up for re-election. Adrian Cross is a top donor. You didn't walk into a police station. You walked into a fundraising meeting." "I know that now," I said, gripping the dashboard. "But I can't sue them, Sol. Vanessa has a court order. If I file a motion, it will take weeks to get a hearing. Brandon doesn't have weeks. He has days. Maybe hours." Sol nodded slowly. He tapped the ash from his cigarette out the cracked window. "Civil court is where rich people go to hide," he said. "We don't want a lawsuit. We want an indictment. We need to catch them in the act, Garrison. Not just holding the gun, but pulling the trigger." "I have the thallium results," I argued. Circumstantial Saul countered. "They will say Brandon was depressed. They will say he poisoned himself. They will say you forged the results. We need something undeniable. We need a confession. Or better yet, we need to show the world exactly what they are doing in real time." He reached into the back seat and pulled out a small hard shell case. He placed it on the center console between us. "This is why you called me," he said. "You didn't call me for legal advice. You called me because I have friends who don't exist on paper." I opened the case. Inside were 3 tiny black devices, no larger than a button. "What are these?" I asked. "High-definition audio and video transmitters," Sol explained. "Military grade. The battery life is 48 hours. They transmit to a cloud server that I control. If anyone sneezes in that house, we will hear it." I looked at the devices. They were perfect. But there was a problem. "I can't get back in the house," I said. "Vanessa threatened to call the cops if I show up without an appointment. If I break in, I give them the excuse to lock me up." Sol turned to look at me, his eyes dark and serious. "You don't have to break in, Garrison. You already have an agent on the inside." I froze. I knew who he meant, and the thought made my stomach turn. "No," I said. "He is 12 years old, Sol. I am not dragging Leo into this." "He is already in it," Sol snapped. He is sitting at that dinner table watching his father die. He is the one who slipped you the note. That kid is smarter than you think, and he is terrified. He wants to help. If you cut him out now, you are leaving him alone in a house with 2 murderers. I stared out the window at the rain. Saul was right. Leo was the only blind spot Vanessa and Adrian had. They saw him as a child, a piece of furniture, something to be managed. They didn't see him as a threat. He is the ghost in the machine, Saul said softly. They will never suspect him. You need him to plant these bugs, and you need him to swap the poison. I looked at Saul sharply. Swap the poison. If you just cure Brandon, they will realize the thallium isn't working, Saul explained. They will panic. They will use a pillow or a stairwell or a tragic accident in the bathtub. You have to let them think the poison is still being administered. You have to let them think they are winning right up until the moment the handcuffs click. The plan formed in my mind. It was dangerous. It was insane. It required a 12-year-old boy to perform sleight of hand under the nose of a killer. I need to make an antidote, I said. I need to make a fake solution that looks like the poison but neutralizes it, Prussian Blue Saul said. I remember the case law. I nodded. I can synthesize it. But Leo has to be the one to switch the vials in Adrian's bag. It is the only way, Saul said. I picked up the case of transmitters. They felt heavy in my hand. I was about to weaponize my grandson. I was about to turn his home into a sting operation. How do I get these to him, I asked. Saul reached into his pocket and pulled out a cheap burner phone. I already set this up, he said. Text him on his gaming tablet. Tell him to meet you at the fence line in the backyard tomorrow morning before school. Tell him it is a game. Tell him it is a secret mission. It is not a game, I said quietly. No, Saul agreed. It is war. And you just drafted your first soldier. I took the phone. I looked at the old lawyer. Thank you, Saul. Don't thank me yet, he grunted, starting the Lincoln's engine. Thank me when Vanessa is wearing an orange jumpsuit. Now get out of here. You have some chemistry to do. I stepped back out into the rain. I watched the taillights of the Lincoln fade into the mist. I felt a strange sense of calm settling over me. The hesitation was gone. The fear was gone. I had a plan. I had the tools. And come Friday, I was going to turn that mansion into a trap they would never escape. I got into my truck and drove toward the only place I could work undisturbed. The university lab I still had a key to. It was time to cook. The old university laboratory smelled of dust and ozone. It was a smell I associated with my glory days back when I was publishing papers and putting criminals behind bars. Now it felt like a bunker. I had used my old faculty key to get in through the service entrance. The security guard was asleep at the front desk just as he had been for the last 20 years. I wasn't here to grade papers. I was here to commit a felony to prevent a murder. I unpacked the supplies I had purchased an hour ago from a contact behind an industrial plating shop in the Sodo district. You cannot buy potassium ferrocyanide at a grocery store. You have to know people who deal in metal finishing and photography development. The man who sold it to me didn't ask questions. He just took the $300 in cash and handed me a brown paper bag that weighed heavier than my conscience. I laid everything out on the stainless steel workbench. Under the harsh glare of the hood light, the crystals looked innocent. The bright orange of the potassium ferrocyanide, the brownish yellow of the ferric chloride. Separately, they were industrial chemicals. Together, under the right conditions, they created the only thing in the world that could pull the thallium out of my son's tissues. Ferric hexacyanoferrite, Prussian blue. I pulled on a fresh pair of nitrile gloves and adjusted my safety goggles. My hands, which had been shaking with rage in the car, were now steady. This was my domain. The chemistry didn't care about court orders or corrupt sheriffs. The chemistry only cared about precision. I set the beaker on the magnetic stirrer. I measured out the distilled water. The margin for error was non-existent. If I messed up the molarity, the solution would be ineffective. If I let the pH drop too low during the reaction, I wouldn't create an antidote. I would create hydrogen cyanide gas, and I would be dead on the floor within minutes. I added the iron salts to the water. The liquid turned a murky yellow. I watched the vortex spin, mesmerizing and dangerous. I checked the temperature. 70 degrees Celsius. Perfect. Now came the critical step. I picked up the second beaker containing the ferrocyanide solution. I added it slowly, drop by drop. The reaction was instantaneous. As the drops hit the vortex, the liquid exploded into a deep, intense blue. It was the color of the midnight ocean. It was the color of salvation. I continued the process for an hour, sweating under the lab coat. I had to precipitate the solid, filter it, wash it, and then dehydrate it. I wasn't just making a chemical, I was making a medicine that had to be ingested by a man whose kidneys were already failing. It had to be pure. While the centrifuge spun whining like a jet engine, I thought about Brandon. I thought about the poison coursing through him. Thallium is a coward's weapon. It mimics natural decline. It hides in the potassium channels of the cells, destroying the nerves from the inside out. But Prussian blue is the hunter. It acts like a cage. When ingested, it travels through the gut. It grabs the thallium ions that the body tries to recycle and traps them in its lattice structure, dragging them out of the body. The centrifuge beeped. I opened the lid. At the bottom of the tube was a dense, dark blue paste. I carefully scraped it out. Now came the disguise. I couldn't just walk into the house and force-feed Brandon a blue paste. Vanessa watched him like a hawk. I needed a Trojan horse. I had stopped at a 24-hour pharmacy on the way here. I pulled out a bottle of liquid heart health supplements, a dark, viscous berry concentrate that claimed to support cardiovascular function. I emptied the contents into the sink. The liquid was dark purple, almost black. I took the Prussian blue paste and mixed it with a simple sugar syrup and a few drops of dark food coloring to match the original supplement. I used the homogenizer to blend it until it was perfectly smooth. I poured the mixture back into the expensive-looking supplement bottle. I resealed the cap using a heat gun to make the plastic safety seal look untouched. To the naked eye, it was just a bottle of Cardio Vitality, but inside was 50 grams of pure pharmaceutical-grade chelating agent. I held the bottle up to the light. It was heavy. It was a bomb waiting to go off in Vanessa's face. But this was only a half of the equation. This would pull the poison out. But I also had to stop the poison from going in. I turned back to the workbench. I had one more task. I took a sterile medical vial identical to the ones Adrian Cross carried in his black bag. I filled it with simple saline solution. I used a crimping tool to seal the top with a fresh rubber stopper and an aluminum cap. I printed a label using the portable label maker I had brought with me. I typed in the exact text I had memorized from the bottle in Adrian's hand, myostabilizer compound, 50 milligrams per milliliter, RX only. I stuck the label on the vial. It was a perfect forgery. I sat back, wiping the sweat from my forehead. The clock on the wall read 4 a.m. My eyes were burning, but my mind was razor sharp. I had the cure. I had the decoy. But the hardest part was yet to come. I wasn't the one who had to deliver the payload. I wasn't the one who had to slide this vial into a murderer's bag while he wasn't looking. That burden fell on a 12-year-old boy who was probably lying awake in his bed right now, terrified of the sunrise. I packed the bottles into my bag. I cleaned the lab, wiping down every surface to remove any trace of blue dust. I left the room exactly as I found it, a tomb of forgotten science. I walked out into the cool morning air. The city was waking up. People were brewing coffee, getting ready for work, oblivious to the fact that a war was being fought in their midst. I drove to the spot where I told Leo to meet me. The back fence of the estate where the manicured lawn met the wild, overgrown forest. It was a blind spot in the security cameras. Brandon used to sneak out there as a teenager to smoke cigarettes. Now his son would sneak out there to save his life. I parked the truck and waited. I watched the sun bleed over the horizon, turning the sky the color of a bruise. I prayed that Saul was right. I prayed that Leo had the courage. Because if he failed, if Adrian caught him, the game was over. And I would have to bury my son in that oak box waiting in Unit 247. I parked my truck 3 streets over, tucked behind a dense row of overgrown hedges that bordered the community park. I couldn't risk the neighbors seeing my vehicle. In a neighborhood like this, where the homeowners association fines you for leaving a trash can out too long, a rusty pickup truck stands out like a fresh bruise. I pulled my hood up against the persistent drizzle and made my way through the wooded path that ran along the back of the property line. My boots sank into the wet mud, but I didn't care. I was watching the driveway. At 9 o'clock sharp, the garage door rolled up. Vanessa's white Range Rover backed out. She was wearing sunglasses despite the gray sky, looking every bit the grieving wife trying to keep up appearances. She was heading to the spa at the Four Seasons. Saul had called the front desk pretending to be her assistant to confirm the appointment. We had a 2-hour window. 2 hours to turn the tide of a war she didn't even know she was fighting. I waited until her taillights disappeared around the curve of the hill before I moved. I crossed the manicured lawn, keeping low. The back door was unlocked. Leo had done his job perfectly. I slipped inside the mudroom, the silence of the house wrapping around me instantly. It was a heavy, suffocating silence broken only by the hum of the refrigerator. I didn't take off my shoes. I wasn't planning on staying long enough to get comfortable. I moved through the kitchen, my hand instinctively checking the bag slung over my shoulder. Inside was the bottle of modified heart supplements and the surveillance equipment Saul had given me. I walked up the stairs, avoiding the 3rd step, because I remembered from years ago that it creaked. It was strange how the muscle memory of being a father in this house came back even as I was creeping through it like a thief. The door to the master bedroom was closed. I put my ear against the wood. I could hear the rhythmic whoosh and click of an oxygen concentrator. Vanessa had moved one in yesterday, likely to add to the visual drama for the lawyers on Friday. I pushed the door open. The room was dim, the curtains drawn tight to block out the morning light. The smell hit me again, lavender and decay. Brandon was lying in the center of the king-sized bed, propped up by white pillows that seemed to be swallowing him whole. He was staring at the wall, his chest rising and falling in shallow, jagged hitches. I stepped into the room and closed the door softly behind me. "Brandon," I whispered. His head turned slowly on the pillow. The movement looked painful, as if his neck muscles were made of rusted wire. When his eyes found mine, they widened. Fear flashed through them first. He thought I had abandoned him last night. He thought the poison had finally won. I moved to the bedside, quickly dropping my bag to the floor. I grabbed his hand. It was cold and clammy, the skin paper thin. "I didn't leave you, son," I said, keeping my voice low and steady. "I never left. I just had to go get the ammunition." Brandon tried to speak, but his throat was too dry. He just made a croaking sound, his eyes filling with tears. He looked at the door, terrified that Vanessa would walk back in. "She is gone," I assured him. "She is at the spa. We have time. But you have to listen to me and you have to trust me." I reached into my bag and pulled out the bottle of Cardio Vitality. To anyone else, it looked like the expensive supplement Vanessa kept on the kitchen counter. But the liquid inside was darker, thicker. I unscrewed the cap. I poured a small amount into the measuring cup. "This isn't a vitamin, Brandon," I said, holding the cup to his lips. "This is Prussian blue. I made it in the lab this morning. It is an industrial chelating agent. It is going to bind to the thallium in your system and drag it out." Brandon looked at the dark liquid, then at me. He didn't hesitate. He opened his mouth. I tipped the cup, helping him swallow. He grimaced. It tasted bitter and metallic, nothing like the sugary berry flavor of the original supplement. I know, I said, wiping his chin. It tastes like iron. That means it is working. I poured another dose. He drank that too. I set the cup down and looked him in the eye. I need you to listen to me very carefully, Brandon. This is going to make you feel sick to your stomach. You are going to be nauseous. You might vomit. But that is good. That is the poison leaving your body. But here is the hard part. I leaned in closer, gripping his shoulder. You cannot get better. Not yet. When Vanessa comes home, you have to be worse. You have to be weaker. You have to let her believe the thallium is still killing you. Brandon blinked, a question in his eyes. Why? Because if she thinks you are recovering, she will change tactics, I explained. She will use a pillow, or she will push you down the stairs. We need her to feel safe. We need her to feel arrogant. We need her to think she has already won, so she walks into the trap on Friday. I saw the understanding dawn in his eyes. He gave a microscopic nod. He was still in there. The CEO, the strategist, the fighter. He was trapped in a broken body, but his mind was waking up. Good, I said. Now I need to secure the room. I reached back into my bag and pulled out the case Saul had given me. I took out the first bug. It was tiny, smaller than a quarter, with a matte black finish. I walked over to the smoke detector on the ceiling. I stood on the bedside chair, my joints protesting, and slid the device into the small gap between the plastic cover and the ceiling. It was invisible from the ground. This will pick up audio from the entire room, I told him as I stepped down. I moved to the heavy oak dresser on the other side of the room. I placed the second device, a pinhole camera, behind a stack of books, angling it so it had a perfect view of the bed and the medication table. This one sees everything I said. It transmits directly to a secure server. If she swaps a pill, if Adrian injects you with anything, we will have it in 4K resolution. I went into the ensuite bathroom. I placed the third device behind the decorative plant on the vanity counter. This was where they whispered. This was where they conspired while they washed their hands. I walked back to the bed. I checked my watch. We had been here 20 minutes. I had to go. I took the bottle of antidote and placed it deep inside the drawer of his nightstand, hidden beneath a pile of socks. You need to take 2 tablespoons every 4 hours, I instructed him. Hide the bottle. If you can't take it yourself, wait for Leo. I showed him the bottle this morning. He knows what to do. Brandon's hand twitched. He managed to lift one finger, pointing at me. Dad, he rasped. It was a struggle, forcing air through paralyzed vocal cords. I am here, I said. Get them, he whispered. The ferocity in his voice weak as it was almost broke me. It was the same tone he used to have when he was losing a wrestling match in high school, right before he pinned his opponent. I will, I promised. I am going to burn their world down, Brandon. But you have to stay alive until Friday. Can you do that for me? He blinked once. Yes. I squeezed his hand one last time. It felt slightly warmer. Maybe it was my imagination, or maybe it was the hope flushing through his veins along with the antidote. I heard the distant sound of a car engine outside. Panic spiked in my chest. I moved to the window and peeked through the blinds. It wasn't the Range Rover. It was just a delivery truck. But it was a warning. I was pushing my luck. I packed up my bag. I wiped down the cup I had used. I smoothed the bedsheets where I had sat. I had to leave no trace. I love you, son, I said. The next time I walk through that door, this nightmare ends. I turned and walked out of the room. I didn't look back. I couldn't. If I looked back, I wouldn't be able to leave him in that house of horrors. I went down the stairs faster this time. I slipped out the back door and locked it behind me with the key Leo had left under the mat. I made it back to the tree line just as the rain started to fall again. I stood in the shelter of the pines, watching the house. 10 minutes later, the white Range Rover turned into the driveway. Vanessa got out. She looked refreshed. She was carrying a green juice. She walked into the house that she thought was hers to kill the husband she thought was dying. She didn't know that the walls were listening now. She didn't know that the invalid in the bed was detoxing. And she didn't know that the old man she had laughed at was watching her from the woods, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. I turned and walked back to my truck. The waiting game had begun. And for the first time in months, time was on my side. I had the science. I had the surveillance. And I had the rage of a father who had absolutely nothing left to lose. I sat in the cab of my truck, parked a mile away, in a dense patch of Forest Service land. The rain was hammering against the roof, a relentless drumbeat that matched the pounding of my own heart. On the passenger seat, the laptop screen glowed with a ghostly blue light, showing me the interior of my son's bedroom in high definition. Through the earbuds jams into my ears, I could hear everything. The hum of the refrigerator downstairs, the ticking of the grandfather clock, and the terrified, shallow breathing of my 12-year-old grandson. Leo was standing in the hallway just outside the kitchen. I could see him on the secondary camera I had asked him to place near the thermostat. He looked small. He was wearing his oversized hoodie, the one he used to hide inside when his parents argued. But today he wasn't hiding. He was the front line. Grandpa Leo whispered. His voice was barely a breath of static in my ear. "They are here." I leaned into the microphone attached to my shirt collar. "I know, Leo, I see them. Just breathe. Remember the plan. You are not a child today. You are a soldier." I watched on the screen as the front door opened. Vanessa walked in looking radiant and refreshed from her spa day. Trailing right behind her was Dr. Adrian Cross. He was carrying the black leather medical bag. That bag was the target. Adrian set the bag down on the hallway console table right beneath the large mirror. It was a careless move born of arrogance. He felt so comfortable in this house, so untouchable, that he didn't even bother to keep his tools with him. "I will go pour us some wine," Vanessa said, her voice echoing clearly through the bug I planted in the plant pot. "Go check on the vegetable. Make sure he is ready for tomorrow." She called her husband a vegetable. My hand gripped the steering wheel so hard the leather creaked. Adrian laughed. A low, throaty sound. "I will just go wash up. Don't want to give him an infection before we seal the deal." This was the moment. Adrian walked into the powder room adjacent to the hallway. The door clicked shut. The water started running. Vanessa was in the kitchen, the sound of a cork popping filling the audio feed. "Now, Leo," I commanded. "Go. Now." On the screen, Leo moved. He didn't run. He walked fast and silent in his socks, just like I taught him. He reached the console table. His hands were shaking. I could see the tremors even on the grainy feed. He reached into the pocket of his hoodie and pulled out the duplicate vial I had given him, the one filled with harmless saline solution labeled perfectly to match the poison. He unzipped the main compartment of the black bag. The zipper made a sound like a tearing sheet. I held my breath. In the kitchen, the clinking of wine glasses stopped. Had Vanessa heard it, Leo froze. He looked toward the kitchen archway. I whispered into the mic. "Keep going, Leo. She is just getting ice. Do it." Leo reached into the bag. He rummaged for a second, pushing aside a stethoscope and a blood pressure cuff. Then he found it. He pulled out the vial of clear liquid, the thallium cocktail Adrian was about to inject into Brandon. He shoved the poison into his left pocket. He jammed the saline fake into the designated slot in the bag. He started to zip the bag closed, and then the powder room door opened. Dr. Adrian Cross stepped out, drying his hands on a paper towel. Leo froze. He was standing right there, his hand on the zipper of the doctor's bag. He hadn't finished closing it. Adrian stopped. He looked at Leo. Then he looked at the bag. The smile vanished from his face. His eyes went cold and hard, the eyes of a shark that just sensed movement in the water. "What do you think you are doing?" Adrian asked. His voice wasn't loud. It was soft, dangerous. My heart stopped. This was it. The nightmare scenario. If Adrian checked the vial, if he noticed the seal was slightly different, if he checked Leo's pockets, it was all over. Brandon would die tonight, and I would be watching it happen on a screen helpless. "Say something, Leo," I hissed. "Lie." Leo turned around. He looked terrified, but he didn't back away. He looked up at the man who was killing his father. I was looking for gum." Leo stammered. "Gum," Adrian repeated. He took a step closer, towering over the boy. "You were looking for gum in my medical bag." "I know you have the peppermint kind," Leo said, his voice trembling. "Mom doesn't buy sugar gum. I saw you chewing it last time." It was a brilliant lie. A childish, selfish, believable lie. Adrian stared at him for a long, agonizing second. He looked at the bag. He looked at Leo's hoodie pocket, where the real poison was burning a hole. Then Adrian laughed. He tossed the crumpled paper towel into the trash can. "You are a little thief, aren't you?" Adrian sneered. "Just like your mother." He walked over and shoved Leo aside roughly. He grabbed the bag and zipped it the rest of the way shut. He didn't check the contents. He was too arrogant. He saw a greedy kid, not a threat. "Get out of here," Adrian said. "Go play video games or whatever useless things you do. If I catch you touching my stuff again, I will give you a shot that will make you sleep for a week." Leo nodded, keeping his head down. "I am sorry, Dr. Cross." He turned and ran up the stairs. I let out a breath that sounded like a sob. I slumped back in the seat, sweat drenching my shirt. He did it. The crazy, brave kid did it. I watched on the monitor as Adrian picked up the bag and walked into the kitchen. He took the glass of wine Vanessa offered him. "Did you hear that Adrian asked her?" "Your kid was rifling through my bag." "He is probably looking for money," Vanessa said dismissively. "He steals from my purse all the time. Ignore him. Let's go finish this." They walked toward the stairs. They were going to the bedroom. I switched the feed to the camera hidden behind the books in Brandon's room. I saw my son lying there waiting. He looked worse than before, just as I had instructed. He was slumped to the side, drool on his chin. The door opened. Adrian and Vanessa walked in. "Time for your medicine, Brandon," Adrian announced cheerfully. I watched a strange, dark satisfaction rising in my chest. Adrian opened the bag. He pulled out the vial I had made in the university lab, the vial that was nothing but salt water. He loaded the syringe. He tapped it. He didn't notice a thing. Vanessa stood by the window looking out at the rain board. She didn't even watch. Adrian grabbed Brandon's arm. He found a vein. He pushed the plunger. I watched the clear liquid enter my son's body. I knew that at the molecular level nothing was happening. No heavy metals were attacking his nerves. No toxins were shutting down his heart. It was just water. But Adrian didn't know that. He finished the injection and pulled the needle out. "Sleep tight, partner," Adrian whispered. He packed up his bag. He didn't know he was now carrying a dud. He didn't know that the real murder weapon was currently hidden inside a 12-year-old boy's sneaker in the next room. They left the bedroom, turning off the lights. I switched back to the audio feed. I heard Leo's door close. I heard the lock turn. I keyed the mic one last time. "Leo." "Yes, Grandpa." His voice was shaking uncontrollably now. "You did it." I said, my voice thick with emotion. "You just saved his life. Now put the bad bottle in your toy safe. Do not touch it with your bare hands. And Leo, yeah, get some sleep. Tomorrow is Friday. Tomorrow we end them. I closed the laptop. The rain was still falling, but it didn't look gloomy anymore. It looked like a cleansing. I started the truck. I had one more stop to make before the sun came up. I had to pick up Saul, and I had to make sure the police from the state capitol were ready to move. The trap was set. The bait was taken. Now all we had to do was wait for the snap. Friday morning arrived with a sky the color of a bruised plum. The rain had finally stopped, leaving behind a heavy, humid silence that pressed against the windows of the estate. Inside the house, however, the air was buzzing with the electric energy of anticipation. I stood in the shadows of the upper landing, looking down into the great room. It was set up like a stage, and the actors were already taking their places. Vanessa had not summoned doctors or specialists to help her husband. She had summoned an audience. The room was filled with the kind of people who smell like money and indifference. There was Charles Sterling, the high-priced estate attorney who had drafted the power of attorney documents. He was wearing a suit that cost more than my annual pension, checking his watch with the impatience of a man who charges by the minute. Next to him was a notary public, a nervous-looking woman who kept adjusting her glasses, clearly uncomfortable with the somber atmosphere. And then there were Vanessa's friends, the socialites, the charity board members. They were not here to support Brandon. They were here to witness the transfer of power. They were vultures circling a carcass that hadn't even stopped twitching yet. They whispered among themselves, holding cups of tea because champagne would have been too gauche for 10 in the morning, though I knew the bottles were chilling in the fridge for the moment the ink was dry. Vanessa was in the center of it all. She was wearing a dress of soft slate gray cashmere. It was the perfect costume. It said, "I am sad, but I am strong." It said, "I am grieving, but I am capable." She touched the arm of the attorney. She nodded gravely at the notary. She accepted the sympathetic touches of her friends with a brave, trembling smile. "I hate to do this," I heard her say, her voice pitched perfectly to carry across the room. "I hate to take this control away from him. But Dr. Cross says his cognitive decline is accelerating. If we do not secure the company and the assets today, everything he worked for could be lost. I am doing this to protect his legacy." It was a lie so elegant and so poisonous that I almost admired it. She had painted herself as the martyr. She was the hero of her own parfois twisted fairy tale. Then the library doors opened. The room went silent. Dr. Adrian Cross stepped out, pushing the wheelchair. My son Brandon was slumped in the seat. He looked terrible. He looked worse than he had yesterday. His skin was the color of old parchment. His head listed to the side, resting against the wing of the chair. A blanket was tucked tightly around his legs, hiding the fact that his muscles had atrophied. I gripped the banister until my knuckles turned white. I knew logically that this was part of the plan. I knew that the Prussian blue I had fed him was working, binding the poison in his gut. I knew that his weakness today was partly theatrical, a performance we had agreed upon to lower their guard. But seeing him like that, paraded in front of these strangers like a broken doll, made a dark, cold rage coil in my stomach. It took every ounce of my self-control not to run down those stairs and shatter Adrian's jaw. Adrian wheeled him to the large mahogany table in the center of the room. He locked the wheels. He leaned down and whispered something in Brandon's ear, a final threat masquerading as a comfort. Brandon didn't react. He just stared blankly at the polished surface of the table. The attorney Sterling stepped forward. He placed a thick stack of documents in front of my son. Brandon Sterling said, his voice loud and slow as if speaking to a child. "These are the papers we discussed. This transfers the voting rights of Ford Tech and the deed to this property to Vanessa. It allows her to manage your care without interference. Do you understand?" Brandon blinked slowly. He let out a low, wet cough. He didn't answer. "He understands," Vanessa interjected quickly, moving to Brandon's side. "We talked about it this morning. He wants this. He wants to rest. Don't you, darling? She placed her hand on his shoulder. To the room, it looked like a caress. But from my vantage point, I saw her fingers dig into his clavicle. It was a warning. Sterling uncapped a heavy fountain pen. He placed it in Brandon's right hand. Brandon's fingers were trembling violently. He couldn't grip the pen. It slipped through his fingers and clattered onto the table. A murmur went through the room. The notary looked down at her shoes. "Oh, poor dear," Vanessa sighed. She picked up the pen. "Here. Let me help you." She wrapped her hand around his. She forced his fingers to close around the barrel of the pen. She began to guide his hand toward the signature line. This was it. The moment she had killed for. The moment she had poisoned for. She wasn't just taking his money. She was erasing him. She was turning him into a ghost in his own life so she could inherit the kingdom. I watched Adrian. He was standing back, leaning against the mantel, watching with a smug, satisfied smirk. He thought he had committed the perfect crime. He thought the old man was defeated, and the boy was terrified. They were all looking at the paper. They were all looking at the pen moving toward the dotted line. No one was looking at the stairs. I checked the time on my phone. 10:05 a.m. Solomon had texted me 1 minute ago. "The cavalry is at the gate." I put the phone in my pocket. I straightened my tie. I wasn't an old man anymore. I wasn't a retired toxicologist. I was the executioner. I took the first step down the stairs. My dress shoes made a sharp, deliberate clack against the hardwood. I took the second step. Louder. The murmuring in the room stopped. Heads began to turn. Vanessa froze. Her hand still gripping Brandon's hovered over the paper. She looked up, her eyes met mine. For a second, she looked confused. Why was I here? Why wasn't I crying? Why was I wearing a suit? Then she saw the look on my face. And for the first time in 6 months, I saw fear flicker behind her mask. "Stop," I said. My voice wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. It cut through the room like a scalpel. I walked down the rest of the stairs, not taking my eyes off her. "Put the pen down, Vanessa." She laughed, but it sounded brittle. "Garrison, you are late. We were just finishing up. Please don't make a scene in front of the guests." I reached the bottom of the stairs. I walked straight toward the table. The crowd parted for me. They sensed the violence radiating off me. "There isn't going to be a signing today," I said. Sterling, the lawyer, stepped forward, puffing out his chest. "Now see here, Mr. Ford. You have no legal standing to interrupt this proceeding. The judge has already ruled." I ignored him. I looked straight at Brandon. "Brandon," I said softly, "you can drop the act now, son." The room went deadly silent. Slowly, deliberately, Brandon stopped trembling. He pulled his hand away from Vanessa's grip. He sat up straighter in the wheelchair. He took a deep breath, and the wheezing was gone. He looked at his wife, and he smiled. But it wasn't a happy smile. It was the smile of a man watching a building burn down. "Hello, Vanessa," Brandon said, his voice clear and cold. Vanessa stumbled back, her face draining of color. Adrian pushed himself off the mantel, his eyes darting to the door. I pulled the remote control from my pocket. "Before you call the police, Vanessa," I said, "I think we should all watch a little movie." I pointed the remote at the massive flat-screen television mounted above the fireplace. The screen flickered to life, and the nightmare began. Not for us, but for them. The screen above the fireplace flickered to life. For a moment, there was only static, a harsh hiss of white noise that made the socialites in the room flinch. Then the image stabilized. It was not a professional recording. The angle was low, shooting up from behind a stack of books on a nightstand. But the picture was crystal clear. It was the master bedroom. It was this morning. On the screen, Vanessa was standing by the window holding a glass of wine. Adrian was leaning over the bed holding a syringe. The timestamp in the corner of the screen read 9:45 a.m., just 30 minutes ago. I stood by the television, the remote in my hand like a detonator. I looked at the crowd. They were mesmerized. They were watching a murder plot unfold in high definition. On the TV, Adrian's voice boomed out, amplified by the surround sound speakers Vanessa had installed to impress her guests. "He is weaker today," Adrian said on the screen. His voice was casual, bored. "The dosage is accumulating perfectly." Vanessa took a sip of wine. "Good. I want him barely conscious for the signing." "Did you bring the final cocktail?" Adrian laughed. It was a chilling sound that bounced off the walls of the silent living room. "Of course. A double dose of thallium mixed with the sedative. Once he signs those papers, I will push this into his IV. He will be dead by midnight. We will call it cardiac arrest, brought on by the stress of the legal proceedings." I paused the video right there. I froze the image on Adrian's face, twisted in a smile of pure malice. I looked at the real Adrian standing by the fireplace. His face had gone as white as the marble behind him. He looked at the screen, then at me, his mouth opening and closing like a fish pulled onto a dock. "That is a lie," Adrian shrieked. His voice cracked high and desperate. "That is manipulated. That is AI." He faked it. I didn't answer him. I pressed play again. On the screen, Vanessa walked over to the bed. She looked down at her husband, my son, who was feigning unconsciousness. "It is a shame, really," she said. "I am going to miss the house. But the money from the life insurance will buy us a nice villa in Tuscany. Did you check on the package in the storage unit?" "The package," Adrian replied. "You mean the coffin?" Vanessa nodded. "Yes. The one I ordered 3 months ago. Is it ready?" "It is polished and waiting," Adrian said. "Engraved with today's year, 1984 to 2024. It is a beautiful box for a useless man." The video ended. The screen went black. For 3 seconds there was absolute silence in the room. It was the kind of silence that happens after a bomb goes off, before the screaming starts. Then the notary dropped her teacup. It shattered on the hardwood floor, the china exploding outward. That was the spark that ignited the room. "You monster!" one of the socialites gasped, backing away from Vanessa as if she were contagious. Vanessa didn't look at her friends. She looked at me. Her eyes were wide, feral, filled with a panic that was quickly turning into violence. She realized her life was over. She realized the villa in Tuscany, the money, the reputation, it was all gone. And in her mind, there was only one person to blame. Me. "You old fool," she screamed. She lunged at me. She moved faster than I expected. Her fingers were curled into claws, reaching for the remote, reaching for my face. She wanted to destroy the evidence. She wanted to silence the witness. I braced myself for the impact, but it never came. A figure stepped out from the shadows of the hallway. It was Solomon Roth. He moved with a speed that belied his age and his ragged appearance. He stepped directly into Vanessa's path, calm as a stone wall. He didn't hit her. He simply caught her wrists in midair. He held her there, her manicured nails inches from his face. "Sit down, Mrs. Ford." Saul grunted. His voice was gravel and smoke. "You are making a mess of your defense." "Who are you?" Vanessa shrieked, struggling against his grip. "Get your hands off me. I am the man who has been recording your phone calls for the last 48 hours, Saul said calmly. "And I advise you to save your energy. You are going to need it for the interrogation room." He shoved her back. She stumbled, her high heels twisting on the rug, and fell onto the sofa. She looked small now, small and pathetic. I walked to the center of the room. I looked at Charles Sterling, the high-priced attorney who was currently trying to stuff the legal documents back into his briefcase. "Mr. Sterling," I said, "I wouldn't leave just yet." Sterling froze. Sweat was beading on his forehead. Mr. Ford, I had no idea. I was merely acting on my client's instructions. I am a victim here as well. You drew up a will and a power of attorney for a man who was being drugged when I said, my voice cold. You facilitated the theft of a company. You are not a victim, Charles. You are an accessory. And unless you want to lose your license and join them in prison, I suggest you sit down and start writing a statement. Sterling collapsed into a chair, his hands shaking. I turned my attention to the corner of the room. Adrian Cross was moving. He was edging toward the French doors that led to the patio. He thought he could slip away while everyone was watching Vanessa. He thought he could run to his Porsche and drive until he crossed the border. Going somewhere, doctor? I asked. Adrian stopped. He turned to face me. The arrogance was gone, replaced by the cornered look of a rat. You can't prove I injected him with anything. Adrian stammered. The video, it is just talk. It is hearsay. You swapped the vial, didn't you? That is entrapment. I smiled. It was a cold, wolfish smile. I didn't swap anything, Adrian. My grandson did. I pointed to the top of the stairs. Leo was standing there. He was wearing his school uniform. He looked down at the doctor, his face solemn. In his hand, he held a plastic bag containing the original vial of thallium. We kept the real poison, Adrian, I said. It has your fingerprints on it. It has the batch number from your clinic. And we have the blood test results from 3 days ago, confirming lethal levels in Brandon's system. Adrian looked at the boy. He looked at the vial. He realized that the thief he had caught yesterday had actually stolen his freedom. He bolted. He turned and threw his shoulder against the French doors. He expected them to burst open. He expected to feel the fresh air. But the doors didn't budge. I locked them, I said. I locked every door in this house before I walked down those stairs. Adrian slammed his fists against the glass. Let me out. Let me out. The pounding echoed through the room, a pathetic, rhythmic drumbeat of defeat. I walked over to Brandon. My son was sitting up straight in his wheelchair. He was watching his tormentors unravel. He looked weak, yes, but his eyes were clear. The fog was gone. Are you okay? I asked him. Brandon looked at Vanessa, who was sobbing into her hands on the sofa. He looked at Adrian, who was clawing at the door lock. He took a deep breath. It was the first breath of free air he had taken in 6 months. I am alive, Dad, he said. Thanks to you. I put my hand on his shoulder. We stood there together, the toxicologist and the survivor, watching the ruin of the people who tried to bury us. But the show wasn't over yet. Outside, the sound of sirens began to rise. Not one siren. Dozens. They were getting louder, closer, wailing like banshees coming to collect the souls of the wicked. Saul walked over to the window and peered through the curtains. State troopers, Saul announced. And I see a couple of unmarked FBI sedans. Looks like your friend the sheriff decided to sit this one out. I looked at Vanessa. She lifted her head. Her mascara was running down her face in black streaks. Why, she whispered. Why couldn't you just die? I leaned down close to her, so close she could smell the coffee on my breath. Because, my dear, I said, you forgot the first rule of chemistry. Every action has an equal and opposite reaction. You pushed us. Now we are pushing back. The front door exploded inward. Wood splinters flew across the hallway. Men in tactical gear swarmed into the house, shouting commands. Police, get on the ground! Nobody move! I stepped back, raising my hands calmly. I wasn't afraid. I wasn't the target. I watched as they grabbed Adrian, throwing him against the glass doors he had tried to escape through. I watched as they pulled Vanessa off the sofa, cuffing her hands behind her back. I watched justice arrive. And it was louder and sweeter than I ever imagined. The chaos that followed was a symphony of justice. The room, once filled with the hushed whispers of high society conspirators, was now a kaleidoscope of tactical flashlights and shouting voices. I watched from the center of the storm, an island of calm in a sea of necessary violence. Adrian Cross, the man who had played God with my son's life, was no longer a doctor. He was a suspect. 2 agents hauled him up from the floor, where he had been cowering. He was babbling, trying to trade information for a deal that no one was going to offer him. He looked at me as they dragged him past his eyes, pleading. I didn't look away. I didn't blink. I just watched him disappear out the front door, the same door he had walked through so arrogantly for months. Vanessa fought. I knew she would. She screamed at the officers, threatening lawsuits, threatening their jobs, invoking the names of senators she barely knew. But steel cuffs do not care about your social calendar. I watched an agent read her rights, his voice monotone and bored, cutting through her hysteria. When they finally marched her out, her cashmere dress was rumpled, her mascara was smeared, and her legacy was reduced to a booking number. The lead FBI agent, a tall woman with eyes that had seen too much, walked over to me. She looked at the mayhem, then at the television screen, where the incriminating video was still paused on a freeze frame of the lovers plotting murder. "You cut it close, Mr. Ford," she said, not unkindly. I reached into my jacket pocket. I pulled out the evidence bag containing the vial Leo had saved. I pulled out the flash drive containing the toxicology reports, the video files, and the photos of the coffin in Unit 247. I handed it to her. "The chain of custody starts with you, Agent," I said. "This is the thallium from the doctor's bag. This is the blood work. And this is the receipt for the casket she bought 3 months ago. You have everything you need to put them away for life." She weighed the bag in her hand. She looked at me with a mixture of respect and something else. Maybe fear. "Remind me never to get on your bad side, Garrison," she said. I turned to Brandon. The paramedics were already there checking his vitals. He was weak, yes. The road to recovery would be long, but he was smiling. For the first time in forever, the smile reached his eyes. "We did it, Dad," he whispered. I leaned down and kissed his forehead. "No, son," I said. "We just survived. Now we live." That was 6 months ago. The rain has stopped in Seattle. Today, the sun is shining so bright it hurts your eyes. I am sitting on a wooden dock extending out into Lake Washington. The air smells of pine needles and clean water, not formaldehyde and fear. Down the shore, I can see Brandon. He is walking. He uses a cane now, and he still has a limp. The nerve damage from the thallium might never fully heal, but he is walking on his own 2 feet. He is throwing a tennis ball for a golden retriever puppy we adopted last week. He looks older than his 40 years, his hair is thinner gray at the temples, but he looks alive. He looks like a man who knows the value of every single breath. Next to me, sitting on the edge of the dock with his legs dangling in the water, is Leo. He is taller now. The shadows under his eyes are gone. He is holding a fishing rod, waiting patiently for a bite. He isn't the scared little boy hiding under a dining table anymore. He is a young man who stared down a killer and didn't blink. Grandpa Leo asks, not looking up from the water. "Do you think they ever think about us?" In prison, I look at the bobber floating on the gentle waves. I think about Vanessa sitting in a cell that is smaller than her walk-in closet. I think about Adrian stripped of his medical license and his Porsche, learning how to survive in a world where he is no longer the smartest person in the room. "I don't know, Leo," I say, "and I don't care. They are the past. You are the future." I reel in my line. The tension is gone from my shoulders. The rage that fueled me for those 3 terrible days has cooled into a hard, protective diamond in my chest. I spent 40 years of my life studying poisons. I looked for them in blood, in liver tissue, in hair samples. I thought I knew everything about toxicity. I thought the most dangerous things in the world were arsenic cyanide and thallium. I was wrong. The most dangerous poison isn't a chemical. You can't detect it with a mass spectrometer. You can't precipitate it in a test tube. The most dangerous poison is greed. It is the entitlement that makes a wife look at her husband and see a paycheck. It is the arrogance that makes a doctor look at a patient and see a victim. It is the silence of good people who see something wrong and look away because they don't want to get involved. That poison is invisible. It is in our houses, our offices, our families. And unlike thallium, there is no chemical antidote for it. The only cure is the truth. The only cure is to open your eyes to look at the ugly things and to have the courage to burn them down. I stand up and stretch. Brandon waves at us from the shore. It is time for lunch. It is time to eat a meal that we cooked ourselves in a kitchen that is safe with people who actually love us. I am Garrison Ford. I am a retired toxicologist. I am a father. I am a grandfather. And I am done hunting monsters. At least for today. If you enjoyed this story, please like and subscribe to the channel. It helps us bring more stories of justice and survival to you. And tell me in the comments, what would you have done if you found that note under your plate? Until next time, stay safe and watch your back.